Alright, so today we have part 1, because I can't knock out this entire video in one day, of episode 23 of Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40k, The Cost of Honor. Now, apparently there has been a lot of you that have been waiting for me to get to episode 23, 24, and 25. And simply just, yeah, I'm ready to go. So we're just going to go. Hopefully, I don't have to put this in the processor or anything like that, but we'll find out. So I'm just going to push this forward a little bit forward. There we go. Here we go, guys. Let's see what the hype's all about.
The air howled, whistling between blades and screaming past audio receptors as the tech priest soared up. Limbs of steel and cybernetic sinew twitched and roamed, movements precise and predatory as she angled her trajectories, both as she launched herself from one place to the next and as she flew between those places in question. She hit the side of a large steel wall and rebounded, bladed hands extended as she flew past a pursuing Republic trooper borne aloft on a jetpack. Each of her spread fingers tore into the false man, shattering his white armor like she would the thinnest pane of glass.
I was waiting for this.
Her adamantine digits digging through him without any more than the slightest, most imperceptible drag. Before the trooper's primitive flesh neurons could so much as trigger a burst of panic, she was past him, and the replicate burst apart, almost seeming to pop before falling from the air in a flammable spattering of white equipment and red meat.
Sucks.
And the domino was not yet done. Around her, Kali's expanded vision enabled her to see nearly all the chambers, the large, tall, rectangular room filled with its titanic hosts of vehicles and war machines. She used these as platforms, running on the tips of blades, scoring marks into ceramite plates and steel alike, and skating on adamantium and air as she evaded the airborne swarm of replicae which pursued her. Spinning in the wind, she pulled her body first one way and then the other, her hip folding unnaturally, and then the same with one of her shoulders, spiraling like a gymnastic deity as the storm of blaster fire that came for her was evaded. Kali Delta had 100 eyes, at least 30 more than her combat algorithms needed, and with them she saw much indeed. Again and again, the volleys of blaster bolts would go off or veer wrongly, losing their target repeatedly as Kali predicted and subverted their attacks. In fact,
I love the name of that, Kali. Yes.
She had opened her first true
I'll say hello to Kali in hell. If you don't, okay, I'm an old bastard. Shutting up.
maneuvers in the battle with just such a subversion. The Domina had seen Commander Bly before her, had seen him drawing one of his so-called EMP grenade spheres.
Good luck.
She observed as his men prepared to open fire to intersect her presumed path towards him, a path she had fully implied she would take until now. But the Domina was hardly inclined to risk herself in such a meager pursuit, and instead of lunging forward, as seemed inevitable to the simple meat minds of the clones, she instead bent her knees in the reverse direction and leapt backward. The priest had watched as the replicate called Bly tossed down his sphere and activated his flight pack, wasting one of his few effective weapons whilst jetting away from her, his bearing sick with fear. The fear of a prey beast before the predator, and she wondered if he had retreated all the way back to his witchling commanders as one of her skulls tracked his route. Even as he fled, Kali launched herself into the men behind her, carefully angling her trajectory to sail under their incoming shots. Like the others, they had assumed she would attack their commander, and so, like the others, they were easy to predict and avoid. Her hands had then met with the weak white shells of her foes, adamantium blades sinking deep and rending the first of her victims apart, though she had vanished from their sight before the struck troopers had even met the ground or died, already racing across the walls and through the air. In response, their hovering vehicles came forward, using true anti-gravitic technology which somehow negated gravity without redirecting it or forcing gravitic clashes to occur. Kali's mouth metaphorically watered at the sight, and for a few moments she merely danced alongside the zipping, speeding forms of the bike-like speeders and larger yet nearly as agile gun platforms. But their weapons and rate of fire were a fair amount more concerning than that of the flying infantry that now kicked off to pursue her, and she could not justify allowing their continued function any longer.
This shall be worth it when I present my findings before the many eyes of Mars.
Oh my God.
They shall watch in envy at the wonders I shall bring forth when this technology is known to me. Even that pompous father of all, Belisarius Tall, will be forced to bow his head in recognition at the sight of what will be wrought by my own mind.
There you
She
go.
thought to herself as she dove like a lance into one of the clone ISP speeders.
Oh my
The
God.
priest spun like a drill as she did, and
Oh my
like a
God.
drill, the monomolecular edges of her body tore smoothly into the lightweight construction of the craft. The replicae within barely had time to panic and reach for their sidearms, limbs and heads falling to pieces with a few errant swipes of the Domina's precision-guided claws.
Yeah.
She leapt from that dying vehicle as it arched down, departing just before its collision with the side of a massive metal leg belonging to a nearby knight. Next was a speeder bike, which she did not destroy directly, instead catching onto the front of its long nose and crawling up towards the two clones mounted on it. The pilot sped the vehicle up as the one behind him leveled his blaster rifle and fired from over the pilot's shoulder. Kali did not pause as she skidded forward on all four limbs, her head swiveling unnaturally first from one side and then to the other as she evaded the shot sent down into her. She lunged like a predatory cat, falling on both troopers at once and ripping them apart in mere seconds.
She's the chick from The Grudge, but scary.
Before bounding forward, still beast-like, and leaping from the butt of the speeding bike, escaping it before it torpedoed itself into the side of the bay wall. She landed heavily on the nose of another bike behind it, jumping off almost right away and exerting a great deal of force into her legs as she did, catapulting the speeder end over end as she bounded up its tumbling course, terminating against the primary barrel of a nearby Baneblade tank. To the credit of the replicae, they absorbed their losses with far less panic than she had anticipated, recovering to give chase in short order, swarming in an attempt to pin her down with their ionized weapons fire. All the while, her servo skulls spun above them, watching, calculating, and feeding her everything they witnessed.
Oh my God.
With their aid and her chosen build, striking her was all but impossible, even for the mass of pursuing clones. That, however, was slowly changing as the Republic's warriors began to take note and adjust their tactics. Kali was yet unaware of the precise science behind the weaponry they called EMP grenades. But she judged the term electromagnetic pulse was either unrelated, misattributed, or a direct lie to mislead enemy technicians. The lethal contraptions were far too effective against too many technologies to be mere EMP emitters. So when the clones who moved to engage her drew them by the hundreds and began to throw, she took the threat with due seriousness. As the Domina began to dodge, speeding backwards in an inhuman reverse run before leaping into the air once more, she began to plan as well. First, Kali located 43 varied examples of projected activations, tosses, and detonations. From these, she acquired enough data points to accurately predict the average time from activation to detonation, as well as many more tertiary facts. All the while, she kept herself far away from the spheres, even as more and more replicators.
This is why you just don't fuck. Like, no, leave her alone. Like, she actually told you were about to get your ass whooped.
Resorted to the tactic. She was actually a little impressed with them. Their ability to coordinate strategies and pursue goals would be the envy of any proper guard regiment. That said, their naivety was a great flaw in their current doctrine, one they displayed as they attempted to corral her into a corner, intending to dispense with her by narrowing down her ability to escape the wide reach of their grenades. Soon, her collating was complete, and the Domina danced before them, drawing them in closer and closer, creating clusters of them as they pursued, eager for their illusory chance at victory. She denied them with merciless, mechanical action, leaping forward instead of back as they made their last push before closing the jaws of their tactical entrapment. She spun easily through the hail of EMP spheres, twirling like an old Earth ballerina as each weapon sailed harmlessly by. Kali's algorithmic cogitators quickly drew lines of approach through the virtual space, spearing 80% of the assembled clusters and predicting no sufficiently threatening counter-response from the enemy. The Domina's calculations now concluded, and all before she had crossed half the distance to her assembled foes. Sparks sprayed as the tech priest propelled herself forward like a magnetically launched core of depleted adamantium-29, colliding into the first cluster of clones like a thrown saw blade being tossed into a rack of hanging fish. Viscera sprayed, and men screamed and died, first from the wounds dealt by the Domina's sudden assault, and then from the friendly fire inadvertently sent into them as the other clones desperately tried to keep a bead on the...
Seriously, if you had somebody around you that was doing this stuff, you'd be shooting anything that moved too. Like, you just be praying. This is spray and pray at this point.
The darting priest. Yet doing so was all but impossible. Kali's speed and predictive sight reducing their chances to the barest margin of possibility. Her cavorting dance of methodical, rapid death continued without pause, and it was not long before the assembled men here were scattering, routing into the alleys created by the super heavy vehicles parked all around them. Even with their formations torn asunder, however, Kali could see that more were arriving every moment, summoned by the crisis she embodied, and the Domina barely had time to create new projections before the replicae began effectively regrouping. She did not waste the time given to her, and pursued the Republic troops with a mechanized zeal born of her algorithmic attack patterns. The sudden strikes of Eldari's Scorpion soldiers, the lunging strides of Kroot Braves, and even the flicker dances of death practiced by the foul Drukhari. Nothing the Magos Domina had recorded in her long centuries of combat was ignored or censured from her combat protocols. The replicae now bore witness to the horrifying, cumulative results of her widely questioned genius.
Yeah.
However, and as ever, the Domina's combat effectiveness proved at least marginally more effective than it was questionable. Certainly, the replicae of the Republic began to question it less and less, and though they did not retreat from the single, vaguely feminine-shaped Death Dealer, they did begin to redirect their targeting priorities from her to her swarming servo skulls.
Smart.
The Domina had been dogging the clones that she had been assailing with such single-mindedness that she lapsed her attention on her drones for nearly 3 seconds.
Ooh.
She paid for this in the form of 8 split and dying servo skulls, all falling from the air as the first volley went up after them. The act brought to Kali the last and most lethal ingredient that her attack had, thus far, been lacking. Genuine human rage.
Oh,
She felt
no.
the hot throb of that emotion as it rose within her mem-locked emotion centers, straining against the counteracting stream of neurotranquilizers her cortical implants began to supply. She cut the responses before they could complete their operations, feeling the heat of her rage waver and then roar back to strength. Being impressed with the soulless replicae was little different from her fascination with deadly Xenos. Which was to say, it quickly vanished in the face of inconvenience, and replacing each of those skulls would prove a major one indeed. Launching herself towards the group that had fired the first volley, she dug into them with abandon, blood slicking servos and mag-locked blades and joints as her butchery began anew.
Yeah, no, let's not play. High in the Primavera habitation spheres of Azure City.
You cannot go out there, Combier's mother was saying, though not to him. He was grateful for that. The youth had steeled himself for days and days, girding his mind for the confrontation his father had warned him would come. And yet, for all that, while he felt more than ready to face down the legions of bloodthirsty imps who now occupied his planet, he still trembled at the thought of facing down Venora Tonvolt in a verbal disagreement. His father did not seem thrilled at the prospect either, but being the one upon which the assault fell, he had little choice but to rise to it. He raised his arms placatingly, the plates of his old armor rustling with the motion. They did not fit quite right, which was to be expected of armor meant for a warrior who had lived almost 20,000 years ago. Starshower,
Wow.
please, listen. he half begged. Listen to what? She snapped back. Harrod, you are going to get yourself and our son killed. Do you understand that? Killed! The woman shrilled, black hair a mess around her reddened face. That's not true, Vin. You know it's not true. We are not the only ones heeding the call, and those damned imps cannot fight off the whole planet. Believe in us. We can do this. We are not alone. The Patriarch of the Tonvault said, raising the passion in his voice, but to no avail. Vinora's eyes misted then, becoming glossy as tears rimmed each. Vin... The man entreated, but she shook her head and turned away. Harrod pursued, following after her as she walked away from him through the narrow corridors of their apartment unit. The soft thud of his boots and the click-clack of her heels were shrouded behind the sound of his words. Please, Vin, be reasonable. How is this any different than what you have already done? You act like there is no danger in sneaking out escaped prisoners from their camps. But we both know that if they caught you doing it, you'd be lucky to join them behind the walls. Despite that, I supported you. I helped you. Now help us. She stopped then and spun around, tears dripping from her chin. I saw it, Harrod, she said, voice cracking. I saw the inside, and that's what you still don't understand. You think I would be lucky to join them? Harrod, you have no idea what you are getting yourself into. These men, the Imperium, they're not human men. Not like you and Combeer.
No, you're right about that.
Harrod began.
No, don't do that. Don't try to push aside what I just said. You don't stand a chance, Harrod. You
Will you listen to this woman?
aren't a soldier. I was a soldier, and even I don't stand a chance. You need to listen to me. To face the Imperium is to face death. It's death, Harrod. Whether you win or whether you lose, it's death, 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 death!
She screamed. Vinora, we are not helpless. We have the Jedi. We have the Republic. He countered back, and she laughed.
Jedi? You think Jedi can stop this? Harrod, I've seen it! The Emperor, the Angels of Death, it's all true, it's all real! And it will chew you up and spit you out without ever even noticing that you were there!
Harrod crossed his arms, facing down his wife's glare. The Jedi have called for Axom's aid. You really demand that we not answer them? Now? In this time of need and for our own sake? He yelled back. Again, she laughed, far more derisively than before.
We both agreed not to give Combeer to the Jedi when he was born. What on Axom makes you think that I would surrender either of you to them now?
Damn it, Vin, we need the... He started.
The answer is no, Harrod! You can get yourself and our son killed if you insist, but I won't help you do it! I won't!
Silence reigned in the time after Vinora's proclamation, her husband fuming in his forefather's battle armor, but unable to think of any words that might shift his obstinate wife.
Your wife was a soldier. She understands what she's facing. You don't. Shut the fuck up.
When the quiet was broken, it was by Combeer, not Harrod. Mom, do you remember Caliph? He asked softly. She sucked in a fast breath in response and nodded her head. And Togan? And Joffre Ra? He asked. Again, she nodded. Mom, they were all taken, along with Hethin, Langmar, and Jory's entire family. I don't know what happened to Hethin and the others, but
Dead.
Caliph, Togan, and Joffre Ra, they found their shoes in Waste Site 333 almost a week ago, he said.
They're all dead.
Sapphire Heart.
Venora whispered under her breath. She looked towards him, eyes now truly streaming tears.
Why? Why didn't you tell me?
She asked. He shook his head. I didn't want to tell you yet. I wanted to wait for things to get better, for the burden to lift, he said.
Oh, Starshine.
She said as she came to him, but he stepped away from her as she did. But Mom, that's the problem. The thing I don't think you are seeing. This Imperium. What they're doing. If we let it go on, if we don't fight or draw a line or something, then things will never get better. The burden will never get lighter, and I will never be able to stop mourning all the people we lose until you're mourning me instead. The young heir said, Come here, no. She started, now becoming the one who pleads. Know what, Mom? We all die. Life does not go on forever.
Okay.
You taught me the reason we fight, the reason we keep the shrines and honor the fallen is because the goal of the fight is freedom. Because the goal is justice. I know that this latest war has been cloudy and that it has been hard to see right from wrong between the Republic and the Confederacy. But this is no longer that same war.
No, it's not.
And if we choose not to fight, not to give everything we have, we will be dishonoring all the fallen we claim to care about. What good are the shrines to the honored dead if we have no honor? If the causes they fought and died for died here?
No, the name of the episode is gonna be a bad sign.
Isn't that a truer death than the ones they have already suffered? Combeer pressed. Wouldn't doing that make me worthless in their eyes? Venora collapsed then, falling to her knees and weeping, letting her emotions flow from her without remittance or restraint. For he was right, and she knew now that she had no choice. When Vin recovered, her husband helped her to her feet, and together they walked into the section of their abode where they kept the shrines of their many warrior ancestors. Most were little more than placards, hologlyphs, and engraved words, but some held much more, bearing cases containing perfectly preserved implements of their former craft. Not all such objects were fit for service, and of those that were, not all were suitable for modern combat. Yet, even among such relics, treasures persevered. Herod's combat armor was one such item, its case already opened. Now they approached the other, a memorial and weapon case belonging to Venora's side of the bloodline. Tearfully, she pressed her thumb to the biometric scanner and spoke her words, confirming her voice authentication. The case, black and made of Iridian steel, hissed open. She reached in, hesitating for only a moment before withdrawing the contents and handing them back to her son. He took the weapon, almost slumping under its weight. A true projectile firearm, not a blaster. He flicked the activation switch and aimed it away, sighting the weapon. Be careful, Herod said to his son, and Combeer nodded, lowering the hefty rifle. How does it feel? His father asked. Combeer smiled in spite
Is that a hand? Is that a real gun?
of himself. He had never been to a true battle, but he had been to training, and range practice had always been his favorite part since he never seemed to miss. Feels exciting. Venora
God.
frowned, but dried her eyes again and spoke. Well, it should. It's not every century someone gets to go to war wielding a heavy Mandalorian Ripper gun. I've only got very limited ammunition for this weapon, and anything you hit with it will almost certainly die horrifically. So, Venora began to say, handing him the few magazines which had been in the case. He snapped one smoothly into place and loaded the weapon. So, in other words, don't miss, he said, his face filling with a confident smirk.
There you go. The greater maintenance base.
Janice, Gala, Farnes, and Sergeant Kalak-Norn accompanied Nerva down into the greater maintenance bay, leaving the willowy soldier by the name of Regent behind to hide and, when the time came, operate the turbo lifts from above. They made good silent speed on their rappel lines, using the tall struts of the lift itself to cover their approach, remaining unseen. Once on the ground, they had regrouped briefly, huddling while Gala kept watch, Laz rifle at the ready. All right. The plan is simple. Janice, you're sticking here. Hide and keep an eye on the lift controls. With any luck, we won't have to signal Regent to use the lift from above, and you can hop on with us as we leave. Farnes, you, me, and Gala are gonna escort our fair lady over here to her chariot. Once inside, we'll hang on tight to whatever we can, said the sergeant. Nerva nodded her head. Yes, and make sure that if you are holding on to the maintenance handholds, that you aren't touching any of the red or orange ones. If you are, then you might get pinched in half when I begin moving the faithful flame. Look for a
sucks.
single solid piece away from the jointed areas. Once we are above ground, I can stop and make sure you are all in a safe place. She said, there will be a deployable ladder on the left side of my my night. If you can get me there, I can trigger it and we can ascend from that spot.
All right, concerns?
Kalak asked, following that with a brief pause in which no one spoke.
Good, now let's get moving. Gala, you're with us, let's go.
The short-haired woman nodded without looking and slid down from her cover, quickly crawling her way to the more concealed area behind the stacked crates where they had been planning, and joined them. The larger Janus remained as the 4 others began their approach, staying low and hugging the sides of the walls as they did. Kalak led the front, Farnus behind him, with Nerva staying in the young guardsman's shadow as Gala lagged slightly behind, covering their rear. They had managed to make it halfway across the room and were kneeling behind a row of large industrial energy filters when the shooting started.
It must be Janus.
Farnus whispered urgently. Sergeant Kalak nodded, but did not turn back, instead waving them forward to rush to the next set of obstructions, a large, bound stack of refurbished coolant pipes. Before he could set off, however, Farnus reached forward and grabbed the sergeant's forearm. Sarge, did you hear? He started.
You're throwing damn right I did, and there isn't a damn thing we can do about it. Now move up!
The sergeant hissed back. Farnus clenched his teeth, but nodded and followed, feeling acid in his nose as a recognizable cry of pain echoed just under the dying blaster fire.
Ooh.
And then, the shooting started up again, but this time farther away, and not in any direction any member of their squad had been positioned. It took the flustered trooper 8 or 9 seconds for the dots to connect.
Hey, Sarge!
He whispered at the next stop. Kalak didn't respond, shuffling forward on his knees, barrel leading as he scanned to clear their next rush across the open space. They were huddled behind one of the odd Onager Walker tanks utilized by the Mechanicus, a closed set of red doors behind them, branded sealed with red wax.
I think they're shooting at the Magos.
Yeah,
Farnus
you
continued.
think?
The answer to his words came not from in front of him, but from behind.
We know she's going to buy us time by distracting them,
Said Nerva.
For how long can she do that?
A
Farnus
while.
asked back. The Knight Mechanicus aspirant shrugged, a look of barely concealed fear streaking across her mostly organic features.
She is a Magos Domina and is well known for her combat adaptations. That being said, there are thousands of replicae in this complex. She'll last longer than any of us, but ultimately she cannot win.
All right, enough chatter back there. The enemy is moving off, so get ready to...
Sergeant Kalak started to say. He was cut off by the sound of a soft chime and snapped his head up as the power indicator above the door suddenly lit. Farnus followed his
sign.
gaze with a jerk of his own and felt his stomach drop into his bladder, hissing in a panicked breath, even as the door hissed open.
Fulgrim's fragging fire! Ah!
Kalak Norn bellowed as he twisted, armored back against the Onager tank as he and the rest of his squad brought las rifles around to bear, opening fire all the while. Just as the doors slid open, the red flashes of light which flew in were nearly instantly returned with a hail of blue bolts.
That
They were
side.
mercifully inaccurate, the replicae having expected their targets to be at standing level. Still, not all was safe, which was demonstrated when the sergeant grunted and was kicked back against the metal of the vehicle behind him as he was shot in the very center of his chest. His limbs jerked and twitched, but he didn't stop firing, even as his aim veered into uselessness. No, the only reason they were able to escape that sudden run of bad luck was provided by Gala. Having been focused and ready, she had been the first to react when the door showed any signs of life, having half expected it thanks to her former life as a ganger in the Underhive.
Nice.
She had hefted her lasgun in one arm and opened fire on full automatic, but given how the white armor of the replicae seemed capable of drinking in las fire, at least to an extent, she made sure to keep her free hand far from idleness. Farnus grabbed Nerva, intending to drag her out of the line of fire, and thus turned just in time to see Gallo rip free not one, but both of her remaining frag grenades with a single swipe of her hand. Then, without breaking the momentum of her swing, she used her index and middle fingers to catch the pins, taut and muscular digits yanking them free just before she tossed. The explosives tumbled in the air, colliding with the walls of the passageway behind the previously sealed doors with signature clinks. The younger guardsman marveled at the maneuver, but was hardly surprised. Farnes had noticed that Underhive gangers tended to just be amazing like that. He figured they had to be, or they would have ended up dead long before reaching recruitment age.
This is very
The
true.
replicate masked behind the doors knew well enough what those echoing sounds were, and reeled back before the twin explosions consumed too many of them. As the tunnel belched smoke and sound, Gala rushed forward, grabbing the sergeant and hauling him up, helping him move to proper cover as she chased after Farnes and Nerva. They found some clever shelter and moved in, Gala moving to lay him down against a stack of massive munition crates.
Sergeant,
she whispered softly.
I'm fracking fine. just get this fucking flak off of my chest.
He struggled to say. Gala nodded and began to work it off of him, getting help from Farnes a second or two later. The chest piece was shattered, and Calic was burned beneath, but the wound did not seem terribly bad, and certainly not lethal. But
Good.
the sergeant's arms and legs were quaking now, trembling unnaturally, and his eyes were filling with red. Sarge,
That's
what's
bad.
happening to you? Farnes asked, heart racing as he watched the man's condition continue to deteriorate.
Ionized my pump.
Calac managed to hiss
Bro.
through his tightly clenched teeth. Nerva nodded right away and went to his left side, cutting away his uniform. Sure enough, built into his waist was a mechanical panel, a blood pressure regulator. It was made mostly smooth to avoid snagging on clothing, melded almost seamlessly at the level of his skin. But the sergeant had been right. It was sparking and, more concerningly, bleeding profusely from around the rim of its form. Gala's face tightened, and she spun around, not looking at the sergeant and instead looking back the way they had come, spotting the line of clones issuing out from the now open doorway.
We've got toys incoming. Let's get you on your feet, Sarge,
said the Underhiver.
Give me a moment. I can probably...
Nerva started, but Norn pulled away.
No time!
He gasped, using considerable will to lift his lasgun and hold it steady.
Gala, you and the kid get the priest to her god or whatever.
He said, panting heavily.
I'll buy time.
Gala hesitated, looking back, eyes wide. But she nodded her head stiffly.
Aye, Sergeant. It's been the honor of my life.
She said, voice hard, harder than it normally was.
Same. Now get on, move on.
Calac Norn grunted as he shoved himself onto the lip of the containers and braced his weapon against it. The replicae were speeding off towards the major disturbance, or at least most of them were. However, not all, and several had decided to cover themselves and make sure their immediate area was clear. Those groups were only seconds from spotting them now. Sarge, Farnes began, tears wetting his eyes.
Save him,
I like
kid.
this music.
The sergeant said,
I really like
releasing
this
his
music.
first volley of fire as they were spotted.
Get that lady to the walker.
He grunted as Gala fired over his shoulder.
Don't cry. Just get out. Make it. Move it now.
He roared. At this, Gala tore herself away and grabbed Farnes, nearly pulling him along as he, and Nerva began to run. Calac remained, slumped against the crates, firing on fully automatic and watching the barrel of his lasgun begin to glow and then melt. But he had to keep the replicate back, had
Nah.
to keep their heads down,
Only
had to
thing I've
buy
heard
enough
so far.
time for... A bolt took him in the shoulder, the force of it sending him back and sprawling onto the ground. His mostly ruined lasgun went skittering from his grasp. The sergeant groaned and flipped onto his belly, mind reeling, shoulder numb, and then burning. Truly burning. But he shoved it aside, ignoring his useless arm and pulling himself forward almost a meter, reaching out and grasping his gun once more. With one arm, he reloaded it, even though it did not need to be reloaded, and even
I
though
know what
he
he's
did not
doing.
intend to fire it again. Fumbling with his single working hand, he managed to perform an old trick he had learned decades ago.
Only thing I've disagreed with is the fact that the barrel started melting. That's only true in hotshot packs, but in any case.
When fighting blueskins outside the sector. By
Yeah, fuck Cal.
abusing the power settings on the loaded battery and gun, and failing to perform the proper corrections, he began a subtle chain reaction within the weapon. Calac had just finished when a hard, white boot kicked him onto his back. He cried out in pain, his mind blanking in white-hot agony for a second or two, the replique above him having struck him in his bad arm. While he was stunned, they kicked away his lasgun and sighted him down. One of them pressed a button on the side of his helmet and began to speak in mangled but understandable Gothic. You, Commander, you surrender. Kalak laughed ruefully at the false man and spat weakly. Damn right, he croaked. It wasn't just the blaster wound. He had already been dying before he was shot down, and even now he saw darkness eating away at his vision and devouring the capacity of his thoughts. Everything was growing subtle and more distant with every second. I am the fucking Emperor himself. He managed weakly. The clone did not seem to take that seriously and turned to the left somewhat, now clearly radioing someone else as he spoke. Helpless soldier here. We take prisoners? The replique asked into his helmet. Kalak grinned a red smile at that and spoke his last words, his breath escaping past ruddy, bloody lips only a microsecond before his overcharged lasgun went critical and detonated like an Astartes patterned frag grenade. I don't.
Well, it appears I am going to have to put this in the processor. That's okay. This is good. Within one of the metro fronts of Azure City.
Combir and Herod were not marching blind. They knew exactly where they were going. The Imperials still seemed to be wrapping their heads around the free information systems that Axom had borne for thousands of years, and while access to the HoloNet and other obvious information relays had been shut down or prohibited, for every channel the imps cut, 8 more remained in more subtle fashion. It had been through these hidden communication systems that the Axomites had begun to organize themselves once the call to them had gone out. Across every possible channel and method of distance communication, the Jedi Master Ram Koda had called for aid, a call that all knew the Imperium would certainly hear as well. This, combined with the proud military histories of so many on the planet, led to a more coordinated approach to their uprising. Traveling down, they made their way to a hidden meeting place, a bolo field hidden within the metal folds of the Azurine Metrofront complex. Bolo Ball was big in the mid and outer rims, but was barely played in the core worlds, yet required a fair amount of space to play. As such, the area they used was both relatively hidden and out of the way, while also being vast enough to hold many of them. Combir idly wondered how many other abandoned Bolo Ball complexes had found a second life in this way, as he and his father entered the area, pushing into the crowd of armed and angered Axomites as they did. From the looks of things here, he suspected there would be many teeming with activity if this one was any indication of the general trend. Already someone was speaking, their voice echoing from the loudspeakers and walls of the large chamber. The 2 newcomers paused to listen. Those with adequate weapons and equipment, stay to the north of the arena. The north! Everyone without full gear, come down to the southern half for what you are missing. Quickly now, quickly, we leave in 10 minutes. For Axom, for the Jedi, and for the Republic. A scattered cheer went up from the crowd, and Combir was led by his father in the proper direction, clinging tightly to his pack and his rare heavy rifle. The spotlights above the field illuminated the patchwork crowd brightly. Axomites from all strata of the worldwide city were here, in all manner of attire, armor, and uniforms. Most surprising, at least to Combir, was the amount of aliens present as well. He was glad for the company and the help, but he had assumed most of them had been rounded up by the Imperium already. Seeing them here brought a smile to his thin lips. The imp's control wasn't even half as ironclad as they like to pretend it was. His father ambled out to meet with some of the more
No, they just simply don't care.
experienced warriors, and Combir left him to it. The youth was content to let his father coordinate with the others, resisting the urge to draw and sight his Ripper rifle as he found the nearby lip of the field and leaned against it to wait. He was joined a few minutes later by another man, a tall man, thickly built and dressed in a black trench coat which covered work fatigues. He was a member of the lower strata, from the looks of his attire, but his movements were solid, almost mechanical, yet smooth. The man had a small carton in one hand, from which he produced 2 white-rolled sticks of something musky and fragrant. One hand deposited the carton into his pocket, fishing around for something else, while the other was raised to his lips, teeth taking the butt of one of the items. Before long, he raised his other hand, an antique lighter clenched between his fingers. Combeer did not know why, but each movement the man made felt so certain that he doubted Durasteel chains could have prevented him from raising his limb and lighting the smokable stick held between his lips. He turned then and offered the youth one as well. Combeer looked at it for a moment, thinking he'd reject, until he remembered where he was and what he was about to do.
Oh, good
He
game.
grinned and reached for it. "Thanks," he said, placing the smelly, wrapped weed between his lips, though he had no lighter. The man said nothing, pulling a long drag out of his cigarette and blowing the smoke out into the air. He looked over at the younger man beside him and sighed, offering him the lighter as well. "This isn't a death stick, is it?" Combeer asked. "No," the man said, but did not elaborate. Combeer waited, but then shrugged and snapped open the lighter, lighting the end of his and pulling on it. He pulled too hard, and moments later,
Died.
Combeer was bent over, hands on his knees and coughing. The older man chuckled, despite the narcotic wasting on the floor, and gave the young Axomite a few hard pats on his back. "Easy. You'll knock yourself off your feet if you take drags like that right off the bat. Start with puffs. Work your way up," he said. Combeer nodded, still coughing for a moment longer until he managed to get control again. He sheepishly retrieved the dropped tube then, and placed it back between his lips, though he did not pull again. "Combeer," said the younger man. "Samael," the older man said back. The man's face was dirty, though the white of old scars seemed to peer past the sheen of soot, just enough to make it clear he had been in some kind of accident. From the way he moved, the young man wouldn't be surprised if he had already seen real combat as a mercenary or proper soldier. He wavered slightly then, feeling a heady rush enter his mind for a moment, making his heart race and then settle. "So, are you here because of the Jedi?" Combeer asked, blushing slightly even before the man answered. "Isn't everyone?
Huh.
Doubt anyone would be here right now otherwise," he said with a shrug and a sigh. Samuel took another long pull, columns of smoke ejecting from his nostrils a moment or two later before continuing. "But no, I'd be here whether the Jedi called or not. I've not been waiting for some light stick twirling outsider. I've been waiting for this and only this," he said, taking what was left of his narcotic tube and gesturing around at the filled field and bleachers before promptly returning it to his mouth. "So you've just been waiting for the rest of us, huh?" Combeer asked. The man nodded. "Doesn't take a genius to figure out this would happen eventually. I just wish it had happened sooner. But I guess a lot of the planet is used to relying on the Jedi for problems like this, so maybe I can't blame them. By the way, kid, I can't help but notice that rifle you're hauling around. What the hell is that thing?" Combeer instinctively pulled the slung weapon closer, and Samael raised a placating hand. "Easy, I don't use rifles. Just honest curiosity's all. It's clearly not a blaster, so it sticks out in this mob," he said. Combeer paused for a moment longer, considering the man a bit more before choosing how to answer. Tall and black-haired, with dark eyes that gleamed oddly like obsidian flakes. But what struck the younger man more profoundly was just how large Samuel was. Easily 6 feet, with a body wrought in pure muscle. Muscle which flexed and bent perceptibly beneath the taut confines of his clothes. In spite of that, the man seemed unarmed himself, though his trench coat was more than capable of hiding more than one weapon, so Combeer disregarded the observation. All in all, he was not sure if he trusted the man, but he was more than happy to have him on their side. "It's a heavy Mandalorian Ripper rifle," he said proudly. Samael's head tilted. Doesn't look like any Ripper guns I know about," he muttered. "Yeah, it's super rare. We don't really know how to make them. Only the Mandalorians might, and if they do still know, they are hiding the fact really well. Combeer said. I see. That's great and all, but what does it actually do? The man asked, pulling one
called
last
a
time
Ripper
on his
pistol.
rolled narcotic. He breathed out a scattering breath of smoke and spat the spent bud from his lips before promptly retrieving another. Well, I guess you'll just have to wait and find out. Stick around and I'll be sure to show you a practical demonstration, the younger man boasted. Samael snorted but did not press the issue further, lighting his newest stick. The two waited there for a brief time before, finally, Herod began to make his way towards them, a group at his back, and a goal in his eyes. But when Combeer turned to his latest acquaintance, the big man was gone. The only evidence he had been there being the smell of smoke, the butt of his spent stick, the half-burnt, bent stick between his own lips, and the weight of the man's forgotten lighter in his own pocket. Let's go, son. We've got a target in mind, Herod said excitedly, pausing when he noticed Combeer looking around urgently. Lose something? His father asked.
Of all the things I miss,
Combeer paused
I miss my
at
mind the
Herod's
most.
question, tugging his pack and rifle, finding them both intact and in place still. He shrugged then. No, just looking for... Never mind. We'll probably meet up later anyway.
The greater maintenance bays. If this knight starts walking, it's a done deal.
Varnus tracked the replique as they flew past, soaring low at first as they strafed his cover with blue shots from their long rifles. He didn't even duck like Gala did, getting lucky as the 3 lines of falling bolts narrowly missed him. He did not miss in return.
Fecking heretics! Heretics!
The guardsman was screaming, unloading with strobing volleys from his lasgun, sending red lances to chase the 3 jet troopers. The 3 were struck multiple times, though only 2 fell from the assault, one dying quickly as his helmet was breached, sending the airborne body careening limply into the ceiling, while the second screamed and flailed, his jetpack pierced by the shots and sparking, flames erupting from it as the replique lost control, being jerked through the air this way and that until slamming with a thud into the floor. The smoking, surviving third did not forget him, however, looping around quickly and zeroing in on Farnus. The guardsmen met the flying troopers' hidden glare, and they both opened fire, though Farnus was saved from almost certain death by Gala, who seized him by the collar and dragged him back, jerking his whole body after her with a single muscular arm. Because of this, he only lost most of his left ear and not his entire head as the Republic warrior cruised by. Farnus bellowed in pain and cupped his molten ear, Nerva grabbing his arm and pulling it away to examine him a moment later. The movement clumsy and awkward until her mechadendrite moved in to compensate for her useless arm. As she treated him, Gala took over their covering fire, shooting first after the clone that had passed them and then at the ones on foot who were moving to surround them. A few seconds and an injection of stimulant later, and Farnus was back beside her, throwing his fire in with her own. They had made a small U out of spare parts and a few conveniently placed tank treads, and were sheltering behind it to keep from being blasted apart by the replique who were now moving to flank them. The Imperial soldiers fired from both sides of their makeshift barricades, barrels glowing as they were forced to put out a dangerous level of continuous fire. Farnus tracked another flying warrior and paused as his sight crossed the massive iron face of their destination. They were so close, almost at the base of the night itself, but they may as well have been a million miles away for all the good it would do them now. Gradually, more and more of the white-clad soldiers were realizing that they were there, and already the number of attacking replicae had swelled to far beyond what they could escape from. Doom became a certainty, and it flushed fear and rage in equal portions into Farnus's chest. And then, suddenly and without warning, a new doom arrived, falling into the fighting mass like a razor-tipped torpedo, bringing undeniable death with it. But not for them. It was difficult for the soldier to catch everything that had happened. The sudden end of hostilities and the swiftness of the ensuing slaughter shocked him utterly. One of the fat, 2-person gun platforms that the replique used to fly around on fell, spiraling and crashing into the back of the assaulting enemy force, plowing burning furrows into the ground and grinding into several Republic soldiers in the process. From its burning wreckage leapt a shape, vaguely feminine in motion and form, every move it made categorized by the need to bring death. The Domina ran on bladed legs, stepping into and through clone soldiers, arms waving as if in an exotic dance, flowing limbs delimbing her enemies as her writhing, spinning form continued to perform its ghastly waltz of death. He blinked and saw images frozen in his mind. The Domina leaping, a duelist's grace marrying machine precision as her performance evolved, the steps shifting even as the murderous rhythm remained the same. He blinked again, seeing her amidst a circle of replicate, arms raised, body bending, the troops around her slowly rising, and in the same moments, falling to pieces, their heads coming free, their legs collapsing away, their arms forming a circle. A grotesque halo falling imperceptibly slow around the frozen shape of the Magos Kali Delta. And then, like the flash of lightning or the searing exit of a teleportarium, she was gone. And the clones all around them were sheared into collapsing giblets of meat and armor. For a few scant moments, all three of the survivors were too shocked to react. Gala actually continuing to shoot mutely into the pieces of the clones around them.
Now! We have to go now!
Nerva suddenly said, popping her head out from behind the cover and looking around to make sure they were clear. Hearing her words, Gala seemed to reorient on her goal, rising to her feet and bringing Farnes up to his own by unconscious example. Without another word, they rushed for the looming feet of the massive walker. Standing almost 50 feet tall and made in the vague suggestion of an anthropomorphic shape, it glowered silently down upon them through blue, inactive lenses. Nerva sped up and took the lead from them, guiding them to where the chain ascension ladder would come down. She called it down with a data pulse which she transmitted through the remaining new sphere connections she had. Blessedly, the dormant knight responded, blinking high above and releasing the rattling ladder at her behest. Wishing the damn thing had an ascension function, she took the solid rungs and began to climb the edifice of war, struggling with her single arm, but managing thanks to her robotic limb. Gala came up right behind her, and Farnes was hot on her trail. She grabbed the ladder and began to climb, quickly giving the other guardsmen room to follow, and together the three ascended for almost 12 full seconds before they were noticed again. A spray of blue shots emerged from below them, and though the spattering seemed ill-aimed, it was accurate enough to strike Gala twice in different places on her back. The woman screamed and slumped against the rungs.
Gala! Oh, throne! Oh, burning throne! Gala! Are you alright?
Farnes cried out, climbing up as fast as he could, though Gala appeared to have stopped moving altogether. The formidable guardswoman seemed to hang tenuously from the ladder for a couple seconds, head lolling somewhat, eyes fluttering as she tried to focus, before the soldier began to slide off.
No! Throne, damn it! No, no!
He yelled, panic festering in his voice as he clawed his way up desperately. Gala groaned, gripping the bars before her once more, gritting her teeth without any strength as she held on for dear life, but failed. The Underhiver fell backwards, away from the ladder, losing consciousness as she did, though retaining enough to grunt softly as she was arrested from her fall. Farnes grit his teeth, knuckles white as one hand held onto one of the ladder's rungs, while the other gripped Gala's ankle with all the strength he had. He roared, pain filling him as he strained against her weight and the swinging motion of the ladder. He couldn't climb, he couldn't move, he was trapped. Distantly, the Imperial soldier was grateful that no more blaster bolts came for him, and attributed his reprieve to the Omnissiah's agent of wrath. Still, reprieve or no, it was only a matter of time before they were noticed again, and the Domina could not be in all places at once.
Let her go!
Nerva called down, nearing the top herself, having paused only briefly to glance down at them.
No! I can't! I won't!
He yelled back.
You have to! You'll die otherwise!
She tried to reason.
No! I won't let them all die! I won't! Emperor, damn me! I won't let them go!
He cried, voice breaking, grip slipping. He looked up after her, eyes red, tears running.
You have to... keep going! Turn the battle! Save the Imperium!
He yelled up after her.
Make it worth it! Make it worth us!
I'm stopping it there. I'm stopping it right here. God, he's good at this. I really, really did like this. I see why you guys have been waiting for me to get to this. I have no doubt the second half of this is going to be equally as good. And if the Hospitaller allows me to, I'll watch that tomorrow. I'll see you guys on the next one. I'm not going to do a long outro. This was just enjoyable. Oh, wow. Alright. I'll catch you guys next time.